First of all, I want to present my sincere condolences to His Majesty King Mohammed VI and the whole royal family of Morocco regarding the passing of Her Royal Highness the Princess Al Malika, the aunt of His Majesty. Inna lillahi wa inna ilahi raji'un. I want to start with the pandemic to speak about the R.1 variant. While the Delta variant has surpassed other mutation of SARS-CoV-2 in 2021, the most prominent strain in the world, researchers have identified the other strain, the R.1, responsible for a considerable number of COVID-19 cases worldwide. It was detected in Japan and is spreading in other countries, including the United States, since April. It was found here during basically genome sequencing in the state of Kentucky. It could affect people differently than the original version of the virus. It could become the second most severe transmissible mutation after Delta. Only the near future will tell mankind about this development. While some locations throughout the globe are falling into the eternal mistake of acting prematurely as if there is a post COVID 19 world for different motives, other societies are still in a lockdown status. I expressed in my last two short videos in September what this pandemic represents already for history, for mankind, and its future. The variants aren't the only factor that is preventing the world from winning the long medical front battle of the COVID 19 war. Alas, geography regarding the repartition of vaccines, immunization assistance throughout the world still shows the big gap between developed and developing countries, despite the big endeavors in some individual cases with some international organizations. Crisis management basically have the facts that I have invoked in the previous videos. Staying in vicious circles for years impacts on education. Deepening the dimension of several other issues are among the things to consider in this matter. Of course, regarding this debate of the vaccines, I've been looking into this list and to see how relevant it could be to the matter. Most of them are not even on the short list of what should be approved when we speak about the assistance in the United States and worldwide. My second topic is related to Morocco's efforts in counterterrorism. So, moving here to speak about the first sequence of the 2021-2022 cycle to remind the determination of His Majesty King Mohammed VI in a clear strategy to combat terrorism in the MENA region and contribute to international peace enforcement. The kingdom works with the United Nations system, in example via the UNOCT and its new center in Rabat. I was delighted to attend the video conference related to the launch of the revised UN Counter-Kidnapping and Extortion Manual on September 15th. That event took place in the Moroccan capital at the UNOCT Regional Center. Morocco participated on programs of cooperation with other countries as well throughout the month of September, notably through the Moroccan army. During this period, we can mention work with the United States and in army, and also with the United Arab Emirates army. I want to comment in this context of action the efforts made by Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum in the field of counterterrorism as well. Another topic regarding Libya's case, I spoke about it briefly on past videos. The MENA region is a strategic area to have an international counterterrorism policy, which will lead me to speak about the case of Libya actually. As you know, presidential elections are on the horizon. The country has been on turmoil ever since 2011. The international community did not bring much to the country's stability since then, until Morocco stepped up to ensure a strategic dialogue. Libya was built internally throughout the 20th century by people like Shahid Boumuniar, like Al-Aqid Muammar al-Qaddafi. Right now, the country needs to get back into a stability process throughout the 2020s. Think about Libya of the 2030s already. What are these elections? A small step of rebuilding. My counterterrorism approach in Libya is focused on their main location to start with: Tarabulus, Benghazi, Sirte, Sabha, Al Qardabiya, and from there on spread to the rest of the country. Long term. Shukran. I will move now to speak about the synthesis of the United Nations General Assembly, the 76th session that is concluding in New York. I will focus on several speeches during the general debates. I cannot cover all the international organizations and nor all the member states. So besides the COVID-19 war that started 666 years after the Black Plague, go figure, and constitutes a sad historic event that marks mankind's history forever. Besides that, my focus at this year's General Assembly at the United Nations is centered around counterterrorism and peace enforcement. The world at crossroads is the general context. Within the pandemic, with the quarter of the century mark approaching, shifting powers and balances is a characteristic of our contemporary world. History repeats itself, like within the aftermath of both world wars. In example, the United States becoming the first power in 1919, the USSR becoming the second power in 1946, the end of colonial era as well. I will start with the allocation of the United States. Joe Biden invoked first the virulent and ravaging impact of COVID-19 variants, like I said in the beginning of the Oil on Fire podcast. Facing the threats of terrorism has never been as well that critical. He spoke also about the Indo-Pacific challenge. Renewing engagement with the European Union by creating some sort of G2 has been also part of the speech of the President of the United States. In example, within Transatlantic Tech Corporation, reaffirming the commitment to Article 5 vis-à-vis NATO was also an important point that was made in this speech. Emerging terrorist threats are a concern for the United States and the world, as we know. The army can't nevertheless solve all the problems. Definitely not in the context of the pandemic, neither when it comes directly to terrorism. He's right, no place is perfect, and neither the 2024 nor the 2028 elections will constitute relevance to the state of the world currently. March 2020 has signaled a new era with new conditions, pushing back every other human activity to the second level. This is valid not just for the United States, but also for how the UN functions in terms of multilateralism. Before moving to other speeches at the UNGA, as many things needs to be reviewed in US diplomacy, I will start by speaking about the fact that America should be frank with France when we speak about the reaction of France volcanically to its exclusion from the AUKUS defense partnership and the cancellation of its $40 billion submarine pact with Australia by recalling two ambassadors. Usually, Paris calls back only one when in this mood. So basically, if we refresh with the Turkey 2020 and Italy in 2019, better still as a supreme expression of concept and disdain, the French hit on the novel punishment of leaving its ambassador to the UK in place. To be sure, the loss of contracts at more than $60 billion after costs overruns in a staggering blow to France, whose total defense budget was just above $50 billion in 2020, but its agreement with Australia meant much more than money, and Canberra's decision to drop a long-term defense relationship with Paris to form from the AUKUS partnership with London and Washington cuts deep. It is, to begin with, a massive public disappointment for Emmanuel Macron, just as the next French electoral campaign begins to heat up. President Macron and his government were blindsided by a development of vital importance to French interest and international standing. The French Foreign Ministry has accused the AUKUS powers of backstabbing and even treachery, but it's the business of a country's diplomatic, military, and intelligence establishment to prevent such surprises. But this is bigger than Emmanuel Macron. The submarine contract was centerpiece of Paris' strategy for the 21st century, building on its military strength, diplomatic acumen, and technological sophistication to come over Japan in the original competition for the Australian submarine contract. France felt it had established a position of lasting influence in the heat of the Indo-Pacific. Better said, it has outmaneuvered Britain and broken into the Anglophone world of the Five Eyes to become a privileged defense partner of Australia. But the position of the United States regarding this matter should be furthermore developed in time. Regarding the other topic here is related to the fact of overcoming the tragedy of TPP. In a common parlance today, the word tragedy is used to describe any ill fortune that befalls a person or group, a destructive earthquake, an example, a fatal shooting, the death of a family member from a disease. But to the ancient Greeks, tragedy involved an element of human error, hamartia, not just external circumstance. On this measure, the saga of the United States and the Trans-Pacific Partnership would have given Sophocles enough material for an epic to rival Oedipus Rex. From the start, TPP was marked by tragic irony, with the People's Republic of China always in a supporting role. The George W. Bush administration notified Congress to its intent to negotiate a high-standard trade agreement with Asia-Pacific partners on September 22, 2008, 1 week into a global financial crisis that would severely undermine U.S. economic leadership and embolden Beijing. And now the People's Republic of China has applied to join TPP's successor agreement, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. Tragic irony. Indeed, recall what the power of TPP was. It advanced U.S. interests along three lines: economic, by boosting U.S. and regional growth; strategic, by embedding the United States more deeply in Asia and the Pacific affairs; and strategic economic, by updating and upholding U.S. preferred rules and norms. Although Joe Biden supported the TPP as a vice president, his national security team argued during the presidential campaign that the economic benefits of TPP has been oversold and in any case went mainly to large multinational corporations. They also expressed determination not to be hoodwinked into supporting a trade agreement merely because of its supported strategic value. But as the People's Republic of China's application to CPTPP makes pointedly clear, the Biden team underestimated the rulemaking power of United States-led trade agreements. Among its other useful provisions, TPP disciplines on state-owned enterprises, the SOEs, digital governance, and labor since upgraded in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, committed a group of countries representing 40% of the global economy to aligning their economic policies with the United States preferences. With the United States out and the People's Republic of China prospectively in CPTPP is now more likely to bend to Beijing's preferences than uphold the United States ones. Like Hillary Clinton when she renounced TPP as a presidential candidate in 2016, the Biden team no doubt fears the politics of trade. For decades, trade was a toxic issue in the United States in this context of action. Uh, Manufacturing unions opposed trade because of its disruptive effects on jobs. Certainly, both parties in this country have paid far too little attention to helping workers adjust to these and other economic disruptions. But the tide may be turning and the conventional wisdom on trade politics may be rethinking, even as Donald Trump sees the protectionist ground. A growing number of other politicians have expressed basically a support for trade. Other two-thirds, according to recent polls conducted by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the Pew Research Center. A similar shift can be seen in where the pro-trade coalition can work. So there may be more political room for the United States to get back on the path to TPP than some Biden advisors believe. And there is certainly a pressing logic for the White House to reconsider its position. China's application to join CPTPP comes just 2 months before the annual Asia summits in November, when new presidents typically lay out the broad outlines of their strategy in the region. A credible trade policy is an essential component in this context of action within any serious US strategy of engagement in the Asia Pacific region. It is what allies and partners in the region want. For two principal reasons. It promises them greater access to the world's largest market, and unlike more fleeting initiatives, the United States is not willing to offer, demonstrating commitment to a long-term U.S. presence in the region. And focusing on this, President Biden should consider his own version of the past speeches at the annual leaders meeting of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum that will be hosted by New Zealand in mid-November. First, even if he is not ready to state his intention to apply for CPTPP membership, Biden should at least signal the United States' interest in eventually being part of a comprehensive, high standard regional trade agreement. Second, he should set out his condition for the kind of agreement the United States could sign on to. This would presumably include the addition of USMCA plus provisions on labor, the environment, and the digital economy, and the removal of one seen to favor large corporate interests. Third, Biden could announce other steps the United States is prepared to do now to get it back on the path to a comprehensive regional trade deal. He could state the US intention to join Singapore and other Asia Pacific partners in the Digital Economic Partnership Agreement, the DEPA, and to build out APEC's work on cross-border data rules. He could propose initiatives with like-minded partners in the region to build out rules in other critical areas such as SOE is an example, and intellectual property. These could form the building blocks of a new and improved CPTPP. Beyond trade, Biden should incorporate other valuable economic initiatives in his APEC speech, including cooperation with like-minded partners on clean energy, high-quality infrastructures in line with the G7 Build Back Better World initiatives, and capacity building in less developed economies. But again, the United States economic strategy in the Asia-Pacific region without a commitment to deeper integration on trade will not be credible to partners there. In fact, the Chinese bid is deadly serious, but not because of what it says about Beijing's motivation or intention. Rather, it shines a spotlight on the United States' own tragic error in walking away from TPP and not replacing it with something equally powerful in terms of governance. So, following the speech of Biden, these are some points that I wanted to outline that must consist of the next steps for the diplomacy of the United States. And since I've been speaking in this context of action about the People's Republic of China, I will move to its speech at the General Assembly. President Xi Jinping stressed on cooperation between the People's Republic of China and the United Nations for the future of coming generations by beating COVID-19. Beating pandemics was always part of the history of humanity, he emphasized. And he proposed the Global Development Initiative through the macroeconomy agenda and dialogue as a key to help for cooperation. Xi Jinping added that one country's success does mean another country's failure. Win-win cooperation creates synergy between nations. The president added that the United Nations Charter is a bedrock to future multilateralism. So he's a very clever and visionary leader. He lived here in Muscatine, Iowa, so he both systems, the capitalist system of the United States and the one of the communist state in the People's Republic of China. These are very important factors in order to lead when it comes to diplomacy between two worlds. So very important to check up the next step. And I want to put up here a point about the policy of China when it comes to helping also the private sector, even being a communist state, but you know how the country has done in order to compete with the United States. So small points just to, after wrapping up from the General Assembly. In the Made in China 2025 plan, the Chinese Communist Party outlined its bid for centrality in key technology supply chains, including renewable energy and electric vehicles, the EVs. That could be an impact on changing consumer preferences and government policy being increased in terms of demand for EVs, driving up demand for advanced batteries. Batteries also have a variety of defense applications that can help enable distributed operational concepts, reducing reliance on legacy energy supply chains. So, what does this mean for America's ability to secure its access to the crucial products at a time of rising tensions with China? So, it adds up because the both speeches of the two poles today, the United States and the People's Republic of China, adds up when it comes to the further steps of diplomacy and also when it comes to these issues of the Indo-Pacific and trade. But very important to follow up with what President Xi Jinping said. He said he knows the mechanism of both systems, and business is good. If China can also help in business, it's very important to bring this on the table. 谢谢. The third speech in the context of the UNGA 76, I want to summarize here, is the one of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. On the behalf of the United Nations, he reminded the states of apocalypse where the world is at in an already divided context. The COVID-19 pandemic supersized the abyss and the surge of mistrust, replacing solidarity in action. F in ethics, but F in so many other commitments are the grades that are given right now. Questioning the whole multilateral system, as I mentioned strongly for a while lately, is a must. He spoke about 6 great divides. The first one is the peace divide. We can remind here with the urgent situations in Afghanistan, Myanmar, the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia, the situation in the Sahel. We can even further add Haiti, even if it's not a conflict and more of a quadruple economic difficulty. Military coups are back with a sense of impunity that is taking hold. There must be a strict focus on counterterrorism and nuclear proliferation in this context of action. The second divide he spoke about is the climate divide, the road to Glasgow, the COP26, towards a final chance to be on target for the Vision 2050 of environment. Thirdly, the gap between rich and poor via ending the pandemic everywhere, first of all, which is the most daunting task, and working throughout financial liquidity when it comes to debt via solidarity in action at the international and national levels. The other 3 divides he invoked are the gender divide, the bridging the digital divide, and bridging the divide between generations. The speech of the European Union was presented by the President of the European Council, Charles Michel. He reminded the acts of war that mankind engaged against Earth in terms of what we see today as a domino effect, the fires, the drought, the floods, the hurricanes that battered the United States, plus the COVID-19. He called for ceasefire in areas where conflicts is raging, notably in Ethiopia and Afghanistan. As I mentioned earlier, while speaking about the United States, the European Union stands for a transatlantic cooperation, between quotes, G2. Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide of Japan spoke about the importance of lauding the symbol of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics as a victory against the COVID-19 pandemic and the hindrance it created for mankind. Japan sees 4 points in its allocation at the United Nations General Assembly for the upcoming future: building resilient global health systems, creating a green sustainable society which joins the Vision 2050 of environment, setting an international order based on the rule of law, focusing on the Indo-Pacific strategic area within this context of action, realizing finally a more secure international community via tools like arm controls and disarmaments. Let's remind that Japan is committed to advancing its defense capabilities in response to a range of complex security challenges. And this is a very important when we speak about Japan's defense procurement and technology policies and the potential to further strengthen defense cooperation, notably with the United States. Germany was represented by its president at this year's General Assembly, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who spoke about the political transaction of his country right now. He invoked the failure of rebuilding Afghanistan and the responsibility of Germany in that framework. Honest, smart, stronger, the three pillars for foreign policy according to Germany regarding the future decade. Military strength without will is not a possibility to forge peace. Without diplomacy, we stay in a vicious circle when we speak about the context of international affairs. The speech of the United Kingdom was presented by Prime Minister, the First Lord of the Treasury, Boris Johnson, who sounded an alarm given the damage caused by COVID-19 and focused the majority of his speech on global warming and other issues against environment, all caused by mankind actions throughout history. Johnson gave a snapshot on how to finance the Vision 2050 of environment as his country prepares to host the COP26. Je vais présenter le discours de la France en français. Je l'avais préparé au préalable, après l'allocution. C'était celle de Jean-Yves Le Drian, ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères de France, qui s'est focalisé sur les risques cumulés sur le système multilatéral et son fonctionnement. Donc tout ce qui a été évoqué par le secrétaire général Antonio Guterres dans son discours et dont je parle tout le temps, le fait qu'il y a une entrave au système multilatéral à partir des actions, à partir de tout ce qui se passe au niveau de la crise de la Covid-19 et même avant cela. Le maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale, cela passe par le contexte indo-pacifique. J'avais parlé tout à l'heure de ce qui s'est passé entre la France, les États-Unis et l'Australie, mais aussi par la question de l'Afghanistan et la politique de désarmement. Jean-Yves Le Drian a évoqué la situation du nucléaire iranien dans le contexte du JCPOA aussi, et le travail de la France auprès de l'UNESCO au Moyen-Orient, en Syrie et en Irak, visant à réduire bien sûr la tension en zone de conflit. La France insiste sur la responsabilité collective pour rebâtir le monde commun. Finalement, combattre l'extrémisme sur la toile fut l'un des points abordés dans le discours de Jean-Yves Le Drian dans le contexte du contre-terrorisme. Getting back now to analyze the speech of Russia presented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, who spoke about attempts to diminish the role of the United Nations as a universal platform. President Vladimir Putin's administration believes it's an unprecedented make-or-break moment for diplomacy ever since the end of World War II. President Putin is aiming through the P5 summit to find mutual solutions. Arm controls is a big concern for the Russian Federation, especially when it comes to nuclear capabilities. Russia is also committed to combat cybercrimes in a counterterrorism effort. Lavrov, on his part, invoked as well the importance of the Russian-Chinese draft in the context of the Conference on Disarmament. President Putin aims to form an international coalition of anti-terrorism to effect And the most important thing here is not to have double standards and base it on international law. Russia will be there in terms of strengthening negotiations and dialogue, especially in the Middle East, where a holistic approach is basically recommended by Moscow. Finally, the Russian Federation hoped that the World Conference of Intercultural and Interfaith Dialogue that will take place in St. Petersburg in May 2022 will play an effective role for world peace. The President of the Republic of Korea, Moon Jae-in, hoped in his address that mankind will win challenges against COVID-19 and in the context of peacekeeping worldwide. He added that it is time for the United Nations to put in place a new set of rules. The organization must build trust among nations. Ever since the days of Syngman Rhee, South Korea played its role to help the multilateral work grow. In terms of international relations, President Moon Jae-in lauded the Inter-Korean Summit and the Singapore Declaration as historic milestones to peace in the Korean Peninsula. The current situation of Afghanistan serves as a stark reminder of the crucial role of peace enforcement. Coming December, the United Nations Peacekeeping Ministerial will be held in the Republic of Korea. Seoul is ready to strengthen cooperation to help the United Nations peacekeeping operations. Moving to Morocco, the message of His Majesty King Mohammed VI at the General Assembly focused, of course, on the pandemic as a historic event that reminded the vulnerabilities of humanities, shown the current ineffectivity of multilateralism, and strengthened the economic gaps of an already divided world. As I mentioned myself before, the United Nations faces since March 2020 the most daunting challenge since its creation. The uneven help to combat COVID-19 in all countries will leave mankind in a vicious circle, according to His Majesty. Morocco is planning to organize an international conference in 2022 on pandemic preparedness and response. Besides the pandemic, Morocco's message focused on migration, where His Majesty is a pioneer at the African Union, on climate change, reminding the efforts of Her Royal Highness Princess Al Hasna as President of the Mohammed VI Foundation for the Protection of the Environment, and on countering terrorism. Regarding counterterrorism, the kingdom remains as a capable partner to lead in Africa and the Arab region. Hosting the UNOCITY office in Rabat is another proof of that leadership. Morocco contributed to a resolution so the United Nations proclaimed June the 18th as the International Day Against Hate Speech. When it comes to peacekeeping, we have to remind the Blue Helmets of Morocco with the United Nations peacekeeping are present in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Central African Republic, as well as in South Sudan. Moreover, Morocco and France will co-organize the second ministerial meeting on peacekeeping in the Francophone countries in 2022. 50% of UN peacekeeping operations are in Francophone countries. In terms of disarmaments, the kingdom was elected to chair the first committee during the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. It is a recognition that the kingdom plays an international role to prevent nuclear threats and promote peace and security enforcement. As I mentioned before, the Kingdom of Morocco and Libya are bound by a common destiny. The political agreement of Skhirat created a positive momentum. Morocco stands with Libya to solve its crisis. The Libyan dialogue is the best path to stability, national reconciliation, and dialogue. Morocco supports the election process in Libya. The message of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was presented by the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, and spoke about collaboration and requirement to strengthen multilateralism amid the COVID 19 pandemic. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia contributed well while chairing the G20 in this context of action. The third contributor worldwide and the first contributor from the Arab region when it comes to the issues of the COVID 19 pandemic. The government of Riyadh leads initiative to rebuild stability at the regional level in Sudan and Iraq mainly, along with other GCC partners. Peace and stability is a strategic choice for the Middle East, but also for Afghanistan, stressed King Salman in his speech. The kingdom is fully committed to the principles of international legitimacy, hoping also that confidence measures are built with Iran in a context of respecting sovereignty. King Abdullah II presented the speech of Jordan where he focused on global threats and that a collective approach based on action is required. His Majesty reminded that the Israeli Palestinian conflict is an emergency conflict for the region that is deepening the refugee crisis. Jerusalem is seen by Jordan as a symbol of unity and interfaith for religions. King Abdullah II rang the bell in his speech regarding the dire situation in Lebanon. The fight versus terrorism isn't over, he added, as Jordan continues to work with a holistic approach and bringing new strategies for the framework. At the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Hashemite kingdom is committed to contribute to the actions needed. In the allocation of the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte invoked the growth of disparities amid the current state of the world. He said that an unjust order is inherently volatile and course must be reversed ASAP. The Philippines believe in a global multilateralism to correct the injustices that are becoming shocking beyond belief. President Duterte reminded that the failure to act will lead to cataclysmic consequences for humankind. The Philippines are ready to work in partnership with other member states in the fields of combating illegal drugs and terrorism. The country opened its doors to Afghanistan nationals, the Rohingya, and other displaced refugees. Like in the case of Libya that I spoke about in the beginning of this Oil on Fire podcast, I suggest here a counterterrorism strategy from the main locations Manila, Cebu, Quezon, General Santos, General between brackets, then for the rest of the country. The Democratic People's Republics of Korea's message stated that the deepening crises throughout the world are raging amid the COVID 19 times. North Korea deplored the instability issues in the Middle East, in example in Syria, emphasizing the global health crisis will only worsen present matters. The social economic development model of North Korea is ready to contribute to the United Nations team on social economic resilience. Improving the people's standards of living is one of the highest priority under the guidance of Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. Even in these hard times and circumstances, the people-oriented governments of Pyongyang continue to focus on policies such as housing and children nutrition. During the 8th Congress of the Workers' Party, the report of Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un stated that North Korea's US relation can evolve based on a goodwill for goodwill principle without double standards. It is an imperative for so many rules of the United Nations to be reviewed to maintain the cornerstone of its missions, such as impartiality and full respect of sovereignty of every member state added in the allocation of the DPRK. Those are the main speeches that I have basically summarized. I listened to many others as well from the General Assembly. Now I want to move to an important event that I participated as well on, which is related to the UNIDER Space Security Conference that took place between September the 27th and the 28th. So in order to summarize, very important to ask the key question why the international community needs to build a sustainable space security architecture and the importance of a peaceful space domain. The Outer Space Treaty entered into force in 1967 during the Cold War, a time of great geopolitical tensions in the international community. The drafters hoped that it would aid in preventing those tensions from reaching the space domain, a feat that the Outer Space Treaty failed to fully achieve. This led to the emergence of PAROS, an objective that has not changed much since it originated more than 40 years ago. So this is a very important point, but also analyzing the space threats and challenges is very important because over the past year several countries have carried out tests and attempts in the matter of counter space technology, as well as ambiguous operations that have raised alarms and incited protests and criticism. Many states' space policies continue to shift towards treating outer space as a contested operational or even war-fighting domain. Then there is the important matter of the dual-use nature of space assets and their potential impacts on space security. States have come to rely on dual-capable satellites to serve both civilian functions and military needs, a trend that has increased with the emergence of commercial actors. Furthermore, it is often difficult to discern whether the military capabilities of a satellite are for defensive or offensive purposes. This ambiguity gives space actors considerable freedom of action, but it also increases the potential of threats to their interests and technology in space. Very important to analyze in this context of action the tools and approaches to enhance security in outer space. So in recent years, as we know, several countries have proposed the implementation of non-binding norms to address the space security related issues, including the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 75/36 on reducing space threats through norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviors, and proposals around transparency and confidence building measures in outer space activities, no first placement weapons in outer space, and other matters were also discussed. Also relevant are norms not built specifically for the space domain but that directly affect it, such as the Hague Code of Conduct against ballistic missile proliferation, the HCOC. Legally binding measures is an important framework when you speak about space security, and they have traditionally been viewed as the gold standard for armed controls and disarmament. Although there are currently no legally binding treaties on the issue of preventing an arms race in outer space, several members of the international community have put forward proposals over the years, and it is very important to follow on that matter as well as on the verification mechanism, how technology can aid in terms of compliance with space security programs. Technological advances, particularly in the field of space situational awareness, that are enabling a clearer and more detailed picture of space activities, particularly in geosynchronous orbit. Wider governance measures, the role of non-governmental entities and non-traditional stakeholders in contributing to space identity is an important question as well. States no longer are the only stakeholders in space. As we know, non-governmental entities such as commercial space companies have become particularly prominent in recent years. Collaboration with these non-traditional stakeholders, as well as with academic research, could lead to novel and diverse approaches to discussing space security. As dynamics continue to change in the space environment, their input could provide great value to the objective of preventing an arms race in outer space and identifying its drivers in order to manage and mitigate them. Moving now to the United Nations Security Council matters under the presidency of the Republic of Ireland in the month of September, in order to invoke the 23rd supplement, Part 5 of the repertoire of the practice of the Security Council, and getting back here mostly to analyze in this context of action the climate crisis report and its impact on international peace and security. So in order to understand this topic better, we have to analyze articles 24, 25 and 26. So part 5 of the present supplement covers basically the function and powers of the Security Council as defined in article 24, 25 and 26 of the Charter of the United Nations, and is accordingly divided into 3 sections. Explicit and implicit references made to those articles in decisions, meetings and communication of the Council during 2020 are described under the 3 sections. Part 5 features, of course, an explicit and implicit references made by participants in the context of open video conferences. Case studies in each of the 3 sections provide an overview of specific instances in which the above articles were discussed in meetings and open video conferences, or which otherwise illustrate how the Council has applied or interpreted those charter provisions consistent with previous supplements. However, Section 3 does not include any such case study, since in 2020 there were no example of substantive discussion on Article 26 of the Charter. To Section 1 in 2020, we have to remind that the Council made no explicit reference to Article 24 of the Charter in its decision, and instead referred to its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security in 12 of its decisions in connection with the situation in Libya, for example, and various thematic items such as United Nations peacekeeping operations, maintenance of international peace and security, children and armed conflicts, protection of civilians in armed conflicts, and cooperation between the United Nations and regional and sub-regional organizations. In addition, Council members and other participants at the meetings and open video conferences discussed the primary responsibility of the Council for the maintenance of international peace and security in connection with a broad range of items. The most salient deliberations took place under thematic items such as the maintenance of international peace and security, implementation of the note by the President of the Security Council, referring here to S/2017/507, and peace building and sustaining peace. In those deliberations, Council members and other participants explored the scope of the Council's primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, including with regards to health and climate change, as it has impacted international peace and security. The working methods of the Council were also discussed as tools to enable and embrace the capacity of the Council to deliver its primary responsibility. As featured in Section 2 in 2020, the Council made explicit their references to Article 5 in 2 decisions, both of which were adapted in connection with the item entitled The Situation in the Middle East. Article 25 was indeed invoked also explicitly 4 times during one Council meeting held in connection with the item entitled Maintenance of International Peace and Security, and 3 times in the context of open video conferences held in connection with the items entitled Implementation of the Note by the President of the Security Council, referring again to S/2017/507, and Peace Building Sustaining Peace was also an item in this context of action. The obligation of member states to carry out the decisions of the Council was extensively discussed during meetings and open video conferences held in connection with the items entitled The Situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question concerning Resolution 2334 of 2016 and non-proliferation concerning Resolution 2231 of 2015. In addition to 7 communications of the Council contained 10 explicit references to Article 25, mostly in common with the Resolution 2231 of 2015 and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the GCPOA. 5 draft resolutions proposed and not adopted in connection with the item entitled The Situation in the Middle East, and specifically with the Syrian conflict and the cross-border humanitarian mechanism established to paragraph 2 and 3 of the Security Council Resolution 2165 of 2014. Also included explicit references to Article 25 of the Charter. Moreover, as described in Section 3 in 2020, the Council did not refer to its responsibility for formulating plans for the establishment of a system for the regulations of armaments pursuant to Article 26 in any of its decisions. By contrast, the Article 26 was invoked explicitly during a meeting held in connection with the item entitled Non-Proliferation. In addition, 2 statements submitted the implementation of the note by the President of the Security Council S/2017/507 and the maintenance of international peace and security also contained explicit references to Article 26. No communications addressed to the Council in 2020 featured this charter provision explicitly. We had the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, and in this matter I want to get back here to what the United Nations Secretary General invokes, the fact that the constitution of a nuclear arsenal isn't a self-defense path, but a road to suicide. The threat is real and has never been dangerous in the last 40 years, he added. Eliminating nuclear risk is eliminating a nuclear weapon, the core of disarmament and the elimination of the weapons of mass destruction, basically. Next year, I will be looking forward to the review conference of the parties to the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation Nuclear Weapons to build commitments. But before in October, I will check the UNIDIR conferences related to this matter. The first one related to addressing today's nuclear challenges by analyzing nuclear disarmament, nuclear deterrence, and strategic arms control. The second one will be related to nuclear risk detection friction points in an analysis of competitive dynamics between the United States and Russia, the United States and the People's Republic of China when it comes to each other's national security strategy and nuclear doctrine. So basically, this is the most important point regarding this matter. I want to also get back to speak furthermore about the Tech versus Terrorism report in a further video related to terrorist use of E2EE, state of play, misconception, and mitigation strategy in this context of action. So as we're wrapping up the United Nations General Assembly 76 as well as the month of September, getting back here to the provisional agenda of conferences and work for the month of October. Of course, it could be flexible and changing throughout the month. All months on a monthly basis, of course, the United Nations Security Council briefings under the presidency of Kenya. Looking forward to the WFUNA event with the President of the Security Council on October the 5th, as well as the drafted program that I will check later when it's finalized. There are other important conferences, such as tomorrow with the UNODC related to Organized Crime Strategy Toolkit, the one with the UNOCT related to Connected and Learn platform launch. On the 4th, there is an important talk at the Hudson Institute in Washington related to Israel and the world. After that, for later in the month, discussion with the UNIDIR related to ICTs, international security, and cybercrime, understanding the intersection for better policy making. And the two other discussions that I mentioned earlier were speaking about nuclear proliferation that will take place with the UNIDIR as well, respectively, on the 14th and the 18th. At the end of the month, so around the 27th, October the 27th, the UNIDIR will also organize an event related to women in international security, focusing on the case of the Middle East. Checking also the schedule of the Palo Alto Network conferences in fall 2021 related mostly to cloud and security.